it will be too late.
You can lock your doors.
Don't let me do it again.
Hey, did you read about the killing? Homo killer on the prowl?
Yeah, I was reading about that.
Talk of every gay bar in town. I'm scared to death of cruising myself.
The pattern of lacerations matched the serrations. The depth and the width of the stab wounds could all have been made with this tight blade.
Could you take off an arm or a leg with that thing?
A couple of my friends were up there that night, and they said they heard singing.
Singing?
Yeah, a nursery rhyme like, "Who's here, we're here," something like that.
How big are you?
Party size.
What are you into?
I go anywhere. Hips or lips.
You fingered him.
I fingered him, but I didn't think anybody was going to go that far with him.
I don't need a guy who'll spend only one night, then tell me he's got no more time.
Hello, this is Caitlin O'Haney, the final girl from He Knows You're Alone, and you're listening to Hysteria Continues.
And indeed you are. Welcome back to I guess it's not really a glitter ball episode, it's more like a hanky and leather episode of the Hysteria Continues, and this time we're going deep underground into the New York leather scene of 1980 and William Friedkin's Cruising. Is it a slasher movie? Well, we will be discussing that in a little bit, but Erik, have you got your disco balls out?
Especially after hearing Hazel Dean, I have.
Hazel Dean, for people probably, if you're listening in America, probably won't know, but Hazel Dean was she was like a very kitchen sink disco diva, wasn't she, in the late mid-80s?
Yeah.
Well, Hazel Dean had one song.
She had more than one.
Well, she had when she had more than one, but she really only had one song.
I should interject here, Justin, and say that a very good friend of mine and Graham's is a very good friend of Hazel Dean.
Well, apologies for their taste in friends, but so no, just joking. Hazel Dean was a kind of cornerstone of anyone who went to terrible gay clubs in the late 80s,
and still to this day. I mean, I was outside a bar on Canal Street in Manchester once, and it had a chalkboard outside saying "Hazel Dean tonight, £5."
They will occasionally still play some of her songs on a big 95.3.
Well, anyway, this isn't the Hazel Dean half hour.
No.
It's starting to feel like it.
No, I started it. But yes, Cruising. So it's William Friedkin's very controversial film, and we'll get into quite a lot of background about why it was so controversial at the time and whether or not it really warranted that controversy. It'll be interesting to see, and also whether or not it's a slasher movie. I think I kind of almost want to make a new term, which is slasher adjacent.
Yeah, I like that. That's clever.
Yeah, because Jason is a slasher.
Yes, indeed. But I think it's going to be an interesting one for us to talk about. But anyway, how are we all doing? Nathan, how are you doing this fine evening?
Can't complain.
And have you ever been to a club with someone with a GIMP mask on?
No. I guess I've not really lived, have I?
Well, there's always a first time, Nathan.
My flatmate went to a Sophie Ellis Bextor gig once, and there was somebody in the crowd with a GIMP mask on.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Odd.
That is odd. I must admit, I have been to a club with someone with a GIMP mask, but it was Skin 2, which was like a fetish night, but it was a kind of weird cross fetish goth night in the late 80s. So there were all the goths there, and then people dressed as vicars being led around on dog chains. So it was quite a strange mashup of styles. But Joseph, what's the kinkiest club you've ever been to?
Probably there was a club in Atlanta called the Masquerade, and they had 3 levels: at Hell, Purgatory, and Heaven. Heaven's where they did all the concerts, but Purgatory is where they did all the leather stuff. And I had been in there once, and it was quite a scene. They were playing a lot of 9 Inch Nails and Ministry and all the Pitch Shifter and all those kind of bands, but it was very leather-tastic.
Did they kind of Ministry and those kind of bands have a gay following in the States?
I believe so. I mean, they may have. I mean, this was like, they also did kind of the fetishistic dominatrix, kind of the latex stuff, but they did have leather nights there a couple of times. I went and see I went to see someone. It was like Faith No More, and I went by Purgatory, and they just had this huge leather crowd in there, and they were just playing some like Ministry in the background. It was crazy. But yeah, that's probably the kinkiest club I've been to. I never really went clubbing all that much.
Well, fair enough. Well, we'll get on to another large opening later when we discuss Cruising. But what, Erik?
Rude.
Well, it's a very rude movie.
It is very rude.
Yes. So before we get on to cruising, or before we come on to cruising, as it were, what have we been watching recently? So, Joseph, anything you want to tell us about?
Well, brace yourselves, because I've actually got recently seen this week. Yeah, just one, but I watched The Clove Hitch Killer from 2018. Any of you guys seen that?
I can't remember anything about it, but I got a vague recollection of enjoying it. Would that be right?
Well, this one's about a teenage boy who lives in this kind of Christian-born small town, and their only real, I guess you call it a discrepancy outside of an overcooked apple pie was like the work of this serial killer 10 years previous, and his nickname was Clove Hitch, due to his affinity for binding his victims in a clove hitch knot. I'm trying to avoid spoilers here because the movie is only a few years old, but suffice it to say, the teen kid begins to suspect that someone close to home may be this elusive killer. And so what you have is kind of a part drama of this young boy coming to terms with this shocking secret he's unearthed. And it's a part thriller as he narrowly avoids being discovered by the supposed killer. The dramatic parts, I think they're equally effective and weird in that the characters obviously exist in current times, but everyone and everything feels almost out of time. It's similar to what It Follows had done with the drab decor and the old cars, and yet they'd have these kind of futuristic handheld tablets. I think where the film really shines for me was in the thriller shtick. It kind of nixes the musical cues of any kind and relies on that sort of, I guess you call it an unlocked door mechanism of suspense. And by that, I mean, it gives you no indication that the protagonist is in any danger visually, but there's always this palpable sense of dread and unpredictability as we wait to see if he's caught or not. It's really well done. The identity of the killer, it is and isn't a mystery in so much that we know who it is. The film provides evidence of such, but the actor playing the lead suspect he's so good at convincing you otherwise that at times you really don't know for sure. And I like that a lot. So, The Clove Hitch Killer is basically like 2/3 of a really great film, if I'm honest. But the final third, I think man, this is so disappointing because it's handled so poorly and it raises so many fundamental questions in order to get to the ending that it wants. It feels completely undeserved. I can usually get past a bad ending, but not this time. I think this one ruined any semblance of rewatchability for me. It's just because the film is so grounded in reality, it decides at the very last minute to kind of sidestep that, and it's very disappointing. So I would recommend the first 2 acts of The Clove Hitch Killer highly, but it has little to no third act, if I'm honest. So take from that what you will. And Justin, you said you had seen this one?
Maybe I haven't. Maybe I thought I'd seen it. I certainly heard the title, but it kind of rings a bell. But maybe I haven't seen it. So what about you guys? Erik, Nathan, have you seen it?
No.
I mean, I'd recommend it, but just, I don't know, the ending might just kind of irritate you.
Okay, well, fair enough. Proceed with caution. Anything else, Joseph?
No, that's it for me.
Okay, what about you, Erik?
I had a Blair Witch double bill. We've discussed Blair Witch, of course, many times on the show. What happened was I picked up 2016's Blair Witch for €1 on Blu-ray. I'd seen it before, but I thought, I can't pass up €1 for the Blu-ray, so I watched it again, and I really enjoyed it. I'd go so far as to say I prefer it to the original, because I watched the original as well shortly afterwards, and it's a film that still makes me feel ill because I just can't handle the amount of shaky cam in it. I suffer terribly from motion sickness, so watching Blair Witch Project is always a bit of an ordeal for me. It gives me a splitting headache, and it still does, whereas the third film in the series, Blair Witch, eases off on the shaky cam a bit, so it's much more watchable to me. Plus, it has the bonus of including some glimpses of the supernatural that you don't get to see in the first film, which I know is kind of a interesting tactic to use, but I much prefer the sort of these brief glimpses of this sort of gangly, monstery thing that they see in the Adam Wingard movie. So, I was unimpressed with it when I saw it first. I was just taken aback by how similar it was to the first Blair Witch Project, but on rewatching it, I've come to appreciate it a lot more. And there's a very good commentary track on the Blu-ray as well with Adam Wingard and the writer of the movie. They recorded it 2 weeks after the film opened theatrically, and the film has obviously tanked or underperformed for them, and they sound at first very disappointed, and then as it goes on they get more and more bitter about the fact that fans didn't turn out in their droves for the film, which meant that there would be no sequels. So anytime there's something mysterious in the film that is left unexplained, they go on saying, well, that's never going to be explained now because none of you went to the cinema to see this film. So thumbs up for me for Blair Witch. Blair Witch Project, I'd love to see it as a non-motion sickness sufferer and see if it's really that much good, but I just get a blinding headache about half an hour into it and I can't shift, and so that kind of ruins the experience for me.
Okay, what about you, Nathan and Joseph? Have you seen the remake recently?
I haven't seen it since it came out, but honestly, I prefer Book of Shadows.
Oh, I love Book of Shadows.
Yeah, for me, that movie's so trashy, but it has a really wicked sense of humor about itself. That's why I like it so much.
And they totally trash Book of Shadows on the commentary track and on the extras as well, saying, finally, we're delivering a sequel to the Blair Witch that everyone wanted. And I'm like, hey, I wanted Book of Shadows. I liked it.
Yeah, I liked it better. I liked it better than the Blair Witch Redux, honestly.
Wasn't the Redux more really just a remake?
It was. Well, it is a sequel.
With special effects, pretty much. That's it.
Yeah. But it's a sequel because it's Heather's brother goes looking for her in the woods after a mysterious video appears online, proving that, or insinuating that she's still alive in the woods.
Because I haven't seen the remake or Book of Shadows since both at the cinema, and haven't seen either of them since. So maybe one day. But sorry, Nathan, you've not seen the remake.
No, I've not seen the remake. I've seen Book of Shadows.
It's not a remake; it's a sequel.
I've not seen this sequel make.
It's the sequel make, yeah.
The requel.
Thank you, Erik. Anything else you'd like to say? Any other?
No, because we've got a lot of podcasts coming up later in the month, so I've been cramming on those, our top threes of 1992 and that, so I won't mention any of those.
No, but I think we've all been watching quite a few of those, haven't we? So I hope
like A League of Their Own, and I've just ruined it. Sorry.
I'm curious what your next pick is going to be because I have no idea.
Yeah, it's kind of out of thin air, so you be ready for a surprise. It's nothing to get too excited about. Oh, look the way I'm selling the podcast.
Oh, Erik. So, thank you, Erik. Anyway, but Nathan, how about you?
I watched Siege, the 1983 movie about It starts with the police are on strike, and this group of guys, they're like bullies and want to call themselves the New Order or whatever they want to call themselves, and they go to a gay bar and they harass the patrons. And one guy at the bar inadvertently gets killed. So then the leader of the gang decides that they need to take out all the witnesses. So they start killing them all. But one guy gets away, and he ends up at this it's like a apartment complex or something like that. And the bullies show up. It reminded me of Assault on Precinct 13 with like a gang looking for just one person, but the people inside are not willing to turn them over. And I liked it a lot. I thought it was really entertaining, very tense at times. The only negative thing that I would have to say is that the quality on the one that I watched wasn't great. Like, especially the dark scenes were really dark. I would wonder if maybe I should check it out if it's I don't know if it's got a Blu-ray release or not.
It's just got a Blu-ray release, hasn't it? Recently, yeah. I think Severn was it brought it out.
Okay, but yeah, I'd definitely like to see that quality of like their copy of it, because I bet it's much better quality.
Yeah, it's one that I'd never heard of before until I saw some chatter about the new release on Blu-ray. So yeah, it's one to watch.
Yeah, especially with us covering cruising, it was interesting to watch this one as well as cruising.
Yeah, absolutely. Joseph, is that one you've seen?
I think I have, but I don't remember anything else about it. The way he describes it, it sounds kind of familiar. It sounds like kind of like Assault on Precinct 13 a little bit.
What about you, Erik? Are you?
No, I haven't seen it, but I am intrigued. I'd never heard of it until it popped up on various sort of diabolic DVD Facebook pages and stuff.
Well, it's one to watch out for. So thank you, Nathan. Anything else?
I also watched The Newly Deads. And it's an excellent film about a
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Are you doing air quotes?
Is it about some people who get married but they're actually zombies?
No, It's about this man who starts to have a fling with this woman that's staying at his like newlywed cabins, whatever they're called, resort. I don't know. But yeah, he finds out that, it's a man, in drag, and he gets upset and he kills the man. And so the ghost comes back and kills off all these honeymooning couples at the resort.
So is it a bit like honeymoon horror, but with a killer in drag, a ghost in drag?
Yeah, it's I would say that. Yes, it's basically honeymoon horror with the killer in drag. It's got some great 80s fashions, Eric.
Oh, now I'm sold.
It's honeymoon horror minus any talent.
Is that possible?
And that's saying something.
I can't wait to pick it so we can all watch it together, because it's pretty much a slasher movie.
No, sounds intriguing. It's one I've heard of, but again, it's not one I've seen. So yeah, I'm sure that will come up on your roster before too long. So excellent. Anything else, Nathan?
No, that's it. That's it for me.
Okay. Oh, excuse me. But I went to the cinema for the first time in forever. So our local cinema reopened, and I went to see Forever Purge, the Forever Purge, I can guess.
In Espanol or in English?
In Espanol, yes, sí. And I read a little bit of the synopsis beforehand, so I kind of knew, to be honest, I kind of thought, well, a Purge movie is not going to be taking too many twists and turns, really. And also I heard that some of the dialogue was in Spanish anyway. So because have any of you seen it yet? It's been out in the States? Yeah,
it's out over here, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's out over here, but I haven't seen it as well.
Okay, well, it's kind of, I mean, to be honest, you kind of know what you're getting really with the Purge movies. It's very well done in so much for what it is, and it's quite high budget as well. I was surprised actually how high budget they are. I forgot they were kind of made by Universal Pictures or released by them. And the kind of central premise here is and it's not really giving anything away because it's in the title, is that the Purge unofficially goes on after the one night, carries on for, well, forever, basically. And you have all these kind of, it opens up with these people breaking across the Mexican border into the US and then finding themselves victims of the Purge. They won't give anything else away. I mean, it was pretty easy to follow. I mean, my Spanish isn't too bad now, but it was fairly easy to follow. But I thought it was well done. It was kind of, it's exactly what you expect with a Purge movie, which, of course, if you're going into like a Friday the 13th movie or whatever, you kind of know what you're going to expect. And this kind of delivers. So, yeah, well worth seeing if you're a fan of the franchise. I don't think I've seen all of them, but yeah, it was fun to be back in the cinema anyway. So that was good. So yeah, the only other thing I saw was we started to watch Hardcore Henry. I don't know if you guys have seen that. It's a action movie which is kind of played out like a video game, like a first-person shooter. That was filmed in Moscow, and we had to turn it off about halfway through because it was just, you know, you were saying, Eric, about like shaky cam, and it wasn't making me feel sick, but because it was just like, it really was one of those movies that just it was just full on, didn't stop really for a breath. And sometimes I don't mind that. Sometimes that's very exciting. But with this, it was I couldn't really get on with it. Have any of you guys seen it?
I haven't seen it, but I know of it, yeah.
Yeah, I saw like about the amount that you did. It kind of reminded me of that movie Crank, but you have the POV shot, like the POV here, so it gets a little more jittery, and I just couldn't take it anymore. It's just like it never stops.
It never stops, and also it's got this kind of weird thing that because it's like it has this because it's filmed in Moscow, presumably it's Moscow anyway, and it's like everyone that they really play up that kind of deadpan kind of like, oh, we don't really care who dies or if you die or, oh, I'm going to die. Nobody really reacts to anything. Everyone's just like really like, rolling their eyes at people being machine gunned. And it's kind of had a weird feel to it. It's felt bizarrely flat to me.
I mean, technically, on a technical level, it's very well done, but it's not something I could get into.
No, we turned it off and watched the cat documentary on Netflix instead, which tells you something. Okay, right. Well, let's get on to the main feature. So here is a TV spot of William Friedkin's Cruising.
A New York City detective in search of a killer is about to disappear into the night. What he sees, what he feels, What he discovers will change his life forever. Al Pacino, Cruising, rated R. Starts this week at a theater near you.
A serial killer brutally slays and dismembers several gay men in New York's S&M and Leather districts. The young police officer, Steve Burns, is sent undercover onto the streets as a decoy for the murderer. Working almost completely isolated from his department, he has to learn and practice the complex rules and signals of this little society. While barely seeing his girlfriend Nancy anymore, the work starts changing him. So William Friedkin's Cruising kind of came out in 1980, the same year as Friday the 13th, obviously, and although this came out early 1980, I think. So it kind of came out just as the slasher movie was really in ascension. And now whether or not this is a slasher movie, this is what I'm sure we'll discuss this. It probably isn't, although it's for the first half, it kind of works as a murder mystery with what could be arguably described as kind of slasher movie deaths. And it's kind of William Friedkin is kind of a strange character because I listened to the commentary and there's a lot of background on this movie. And obviously he made previous to this, made The French Connection and also of course, The Exorcist. And he'd made another kind of inverted commas gay movie, The Boys in the Band, in the early 1970s, which I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's kind of fly on the wall of this kind of one night or two nights of these friends getting together, and it paints all the kind of the gay men in all depressed and not happy with their lot basically. And to paraphrase William Friedkin, he sort of said, I think he said when he was describing Cruising and The Boys in the Band, I'm sure there are gay stories with happy endings and happy people, but I'm not making one of those movies. So Cruising to me is a film that I had seen, and I think I'd seen it on UK TV many years ago, and of course it's highly truncated, I'm sure. But I watched the Blu-ray of it, and it looks fantastic. It has that griminess that we kind of love of the early 1980s New York that you would have seen in films, anything from Nightmares and a Damaged Brain. The opening remind me of Zombie Flesh Eaters, the Lucio Fulci movie from the previous year, finding the body parts floating in the Hudson Bay. And I imagine actually this movie very possibly influenced Lucio Fulci's A New York Ripper. Sort of going forward, but for me, I'm conflicted with this movie because I think William Friedkin is a great director, but I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if he really knows himself what he was going for with this movie, because he called it, said it is ultimately a murder mystery, which happens to have like S&M and leather bars as a backdrop. But it wasn't the focus. It's not a gay movie. It's the gay elements were, he said, a backdrop to the movie. But I think he kind of got seduced, for want of a better term, by the more outrageous elements of S&M, the leather bars of the time. And he kind of reveled in that. And I think there was kind of certain perversity on his part of thinking that when Middle America sees this, it's going to really shock them. Just in the same way as I think he probably had this kind of slightly childlike glee at watching people when you've got the little girl in The Exorcist saying your mother sucks cocks in hell. He's kind of, I think he seemed to enjoy shocking people. And I'm not entirely sure, and I'm going to be interested to hear what you guys think about whether or not he really thought through what, the impact of this movie, because it had a real world impact on, and very controversial at the time. And for me, it kind of works. It's an intriguing premise, and again, we'll get to background. A lot of it's based on real life events, and also it was kind of based on a book, 1970 book called I think it was called Cruising, which is about murders in gay clubland in New York. But William Friedkin sort of he decided to set it in leather bars because of that extra frisson, I kind of guess, of whatever he was going for. And you got Al Pacino as this kind of who supposedly supposed to start the movie as this kind of complete innocent, I kind of guess. And I found it a little bit difficult to take Al Pacino in that role. In fact, actually, one of the reviews I read of him, they described him as a hairy avocado. I'm not sure what kind of insult that is, but it's probably not a good thing. And apparently, originally, Richard Gere was meant to be playing the Al Pacino role. And I could really see Richard Gere in that perhaps more than Al Pacino, who is a fine actor, but I don't know. I'm not sure if he can really carried it off the film, to be honest. But he plays this supposedly rookie cop who is assigned to go undercover to investigate these gay murders. But the thing that kind of undermines kind of William Friedkin's assertions that this is a murder mystery is the fact is that, and obviously we're spoiling it, is there seems to be lots of different killers in the movie, because the movie starts with body parts floating in the Hudson Bay, and they're saying there's been these torso murders. But then none of the murders we see in the film have any kind of suggestion that anyone's been dismembered, for a start. And then you have this kind of strange dynamic where you have like the first murderer then being murdered by someone else in the park, and then it's not entirely clear who some of the other murderers are. It's almost as if and this is why I think the movie was kind of was so controversial in a lot of ways, because people were saying, well, what exactly is William Friedkin getting at? Because if for a murder mystery, what is the murder mystery here, apart from you've just got lots of different gay men killing other gay men? What actually, it's not an Agatha Christie or even a slasher movie where you've got the killer is revealed, the Scooby-Doo style. It's kind of it's very ambiguous. And when I was watching it, I was thinking, well, I really like this because this is really interesting, because it's kind of it's kind of almost kind of otherworldly what's actually going on here, and again when we get into background, find perhaps that wasn't as intentional as William Friedkin in the commentary makes out that everything was intended, and it doesn't sound like it was particularly kind of a well-planned shoot, put it that way. So I have very mixed feelings about this movie, but I know for you, Erik, this was your first time watch, wasn't it? So what did you make of Cruising?
Yeah, I'd never seen it before, and the reason I'd avoided it was because reading reviews, it kind of led me to believe that it was a really confusing film with no kind of cohesion to the plot, and it was a narrative mess, and that's why I kind of avoided it. I thought it was just going to be a waste of. And I had it in my head for some reason that it was a 2.5 hour film, but it's actually only 100 minutes. But whilst the film does, as you say, have a lot of ambiguities about it, and it leaves a number of questions at the end, for the most part, it's a fairly straightforward plot. And there are some very oddball moments thrown in there as well. But overall, I have to say, I loved it. I really enjoyed it. To start off with, I got that same vibe from the opening scene that you did. I'd written down here, it kind of reminds me of a mix of Zombie Flesh Eaters and New York Ripper, that opening set on the Hudson with the trawlers finding the body parts. And also the fact that they've dubbed a lot of the dialogue in for reasons we'll get onto in the background. It also gives it that kind of strange European feel where the sound of the voices doesn't match the environment, so it has that kind of Fulci feel there as well. That first murder we see with the guy tied up on the bed, he's face down. By the way, when he first shows up on screen in the bar at the start, I was like, is that Al Pacino? He looks slightly different. Now, there's a reason he looks like Al Pacino, obviously, because apparently Al Pacino's look is the kind of look that the killer is going after, so that's why they employ him to go undercover. But this guy does actually look like Al Pacino in it. But anyway, his death is it's really quite nasty without being too graphic. It reminded me of the killings in David Fincher's film Zodiac, where we see the victims' faces as they're being stabbed in the back, and it's really quite disturbing. So that really threw me, that opening murder. I was like, whoa, this is kind of a dark film, isn't it? But then to lighten things up, we have Al Pacino dancing, which he takes a sniff of some poppers and he starts dancing. I call it dancing, but let's just say I don't think Dancing with the Stars are going to be calling anytime soon, because it really is. It's more like pogoing but gone wrong. I thought it was really interesting to see Al Pacino in that role of being quite innocent at the start. I thought it was a real change of pace for him. I'm used to him as being Scarface and in The Godfather and having this kind of swagger to him, and that was kind of missing in this, but I kind of liked that as well. I loved the scene where he goes into the I suppose it's a clothes shop or whatever it is, and the guy there, played by Powers Booth in a cameo role, is explaining the hanky code to him, and he's saying it so very matter-of-factly. You know, oh, if you wear the yellow hanky in your right pocket, it means you want to be pissed on, and all this type of thing. I thought that was good fun as well. The bit that stood out to me most, though, was the interrogation scene where, you know, the innocent Skip and the undercover Steve are getting their asses kicked by a cop in a Stetson and a jockstrap. And at first, when I was watching this first, I was thinking, that has to be an hallucination. What the hell is this scene about? It was only when I listened to the commentary track that I understood what the hell that was all about. I was convinced, okay, this has to be a hallucination. What the hell?
What was it about? Because I'm just as confused as you were.
Okay, well, William Friedkin says that the guy actually playing the role is a real cop, and this is what he really does: is that to rough up suspects, he comes in a jockstrap and a Stetson, so that if they complain to the authorities, if they say to somebody, oh, I was attacked by this cop in a Stetson and a jockstrap, they'll laugh at them thinking they're making it up. And that's why they do it, apparently.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's to make an unbelievable scenario so that they can't, if somebody makes a complaint, it sounds implausible.
I guess I can take out in my notes, I've got, and the scene with the big black bear, what the fuck? I guess I can take that out now that I know the explanation.
But it's still what the fuck, and apparently it's real. It just makes me, wow, I'm so innocent. I just don't know half of this stuff. And the film kind of shifts its focus from time to time. It starts off with Pacino learning all about the leather scene and how he shouldn't wear certain hankies in his back pocket, or you know, don't forget to check the listings to make sure it's not precinct night if you're going to turn up in just civilians' clothing. It moves into investigation then, and then into a surveillance movie at the end. So there's a bit of variety in it, I thought. I love the atmosphere of it, that late 70s, because it's filmed in 79, so that late 70s New York feel, I think, is captured really well. Now, I mean, I've got no frame of reference. I wasn't in New York in the late 70s. It's not a nostalgia trip. I find it really interesting to see it. It feels like it's from a different time and place, and it is. I mean, it's 42 years ago now this film was shot. But I just love the atmosphere and the time period that they capture in this film. I don't have any real issues with any perceived homophobia in the film, personally. I think it's kind of equal opportunities with its, the way it depicts the cops as being just as despicable as anyone else. I think I'm kind of siding with William Friedkin on this, that the gay scene is just kind of a backdrop to the sort of murder, quote, mystery. I do agree with you, though, Justin. He does seem to revel in wanting to shock. He has that kind of Marilyn Manson attitude where he's kind of childish, and you get the impression he's getting a lot of satisfaction out of creating scenes that will shock old grannies, living in small town USA. But that doesn't bother me. I mean, the whole attraction to The Exorcist when I was a 14-year-old was for the shock scenes, and it was only sort of after that I began to appreciate it on the whole as a complete film, whereas before I just wanted to see head spinning and vomiting and stuff, and potty mouth stuff, as I'm a big fan of that. So yeah, and I thought that the handling of Don Scardino's character was quite sensitive and well handled, and he, it showed that not all gay men are into leather and S&M and fisting in public and taking poppers and stuff. So whilst it does have a lot of sort of gay stereotyping in it, I thought Don Scardino's character was the one exception to that. So, a kudos for that, I suppose. And it's I certainly didn't. I get more of a sense of not homophobia, but sort of a sneering attitude towards homosexuality in the films of Dario Argento, because whenever he has a gay character, they're always highly effeminate, like they've just walked off the set of Are You Being Served? But no, overall, Cruising, I absolutely loved it, Justin, I have to say. The atmosphere, the mood and time period it sets, and also like the murder mystery aspect. I mean, the slasher element is there, I think. I mean, it's not front and center like Friday the 13th, but it is in there. And, whilst it could be a cop movie, it could be a gay movie, or it could be a slasher movie. It's kind of all three mixed. I think it qualifies for the Hysteria Continues quite nicely, to be fair. And, as I said, we've covered Rabid Grannies in the past, so why not Cruising?
How dare you?
How dare I, indeed.
The other thing that made me sort of shake my head and think how ridiculous, because obviously the scene with the Copner jockstrap and the interrogation scene really is an eye opener. But the other scene before that, when Skip and Al Pacino's character go back to the hotel room and they think he's the killer, so they kind of tapped him, but they can't hear what's being said, so they burst into the room. But Al Pacino's allowed himself to be trussed up, hasn't he, on the bed, naked.
When I saw that scene, I was reminded of and Nathan will get this, the South Park episode where the undercover cop who keeps going way too far undercover.
It's just kind of, I just thought, what's going on here? What exactly?
He could have been killed there.
Well, exactly. He could have been, because, he was, if that had been the killer, he was tied up like the first victim. And again, this is kind of weird thing running through it, that even though Skip isn't the killer, he is tying up Al Pacino like the killer who's just been murdered did his first victim, which is why I think there is some, you can certainly take some reading that it's kind of why it was controversial, and so much that it seems like it was almost as if there was this kind of hive mentality running through the gay community in this film of the killers. They were all part of this hive mind almost. It's strange. And also just one last thing very quickly before, in case I forget it, was about the Dario Argento thing, is I thought it was interesting with the nursery rhyme in the park. And apparently that was actually a true thing. A nursery rhyme was heard at one of the murders that inspired it, but it reminded me of the Dario Argento movies like Deep Red, and a lot of his movies have those kind of nursery rhymes running through them. And Argento had long said he really wanted to make a giallo full of only gay men. So although I agree with Erik that sometimes his characters are quite stereotypical in his gialli, it would have been interesting to have made, if he had made a movie where all the characters were gay, but obviously he couldn't get funding for that. So obviously Friedkin doesn't mention any of that as an influence, but I don't know if they kind of did the gialli of Argento and those kind of Italian films of the early 70s were an influence on him. I imagine they very probably were, but no, thank you, Erik. Nathan, how about you? Was it your first time watch?
Yes, this was a first time watch for me as well. And I pretty much have to agree with what, you and Erik have said. I know that some people, or I've read, that, the accusations of the homophobia in the movie. But to me, the characters that are homophobic in the movie are scumbag characters. They're bad in general. So I never got this homophobia on the movie itself. There were characters in it that were very homophobic. Even in the opening, it opens with the cops harassing, the two drag queens, just harassing them for no reason whatsoever. It's completely unprovoked. And you just get the vibe that, that's just what they love to do. They love to rough up, gay people. And, there was a scene in it. Sorry, that was Stripes. There was a scene in it where the cop, the chief, Edelson, says, he's like, I, don't enjoy roughing them up, what they did to Skip, but he's like, it's the job. And he's just kind of got this a level of acceptance that this is just the way it is. But that's of course BS. It doesn't have to be that way. And, they do just basically try to beat Skip into a confession, and it's really hard to watch, and also very, like you said, otherworldly, because when I saw the the big guy, I was like, who is this? What are they doing? And see, to me, and this is, I wrote you guys about this as well, I was so confused about the killer in this movie, because I thought there was just one killer, and I thought that it was actually Stewart, the gay musician, the one that has the schizophrenia. I thought that he was the killer, but then of course later Ted's body is found and he's stabbed to death, and we are basically led to believe that Al Pacino himself might have murdered Ted, which is insane to me. I don't know why, unless it's just saying he got too invested in the case. I don't know, but yeah, that was, it's a very interesting movie, and, I rewatched it after, I read about the multiple killers. That way I could kind of get a better idea behind it, because for some reason I'd always thought this movie was a whodunit, but it's not. I mean, you see the killer. I mean, the very first murder, you see the killer very, plainly. So it's not really a whodunit. But no, I thought it was a very interesting, very, very interesting staple of the time, I guess, like Erik was saying. But I really enjoyed it. I don't know what to make of the ending, except Al Pacino is the serial killer now, maybe. I don't know. But poor Ted, his killing looked brutal too. So I felt bad for Ted. I'm going to say that.
Yeah, well, that was Don Scardino, wasn't it? Who, of course, was in He Knows You're Alone the same year. And when we get to some background, he had some choice words about the ending of his character. So, yeah. So, well, thank you, Nathan. Anything else you'd like to say?
No.
Okay. Well, let's hear what Joseph thought of the movie. Again, was it your first time watch?
No, I've seen this a few times, but I feel like I can only review the slasher parts of Cruising, which I think are excellent and stylish. I also like the general idea that, at least in this movie, that murder begets murder, but that also ties in with the part of Cruising I feel I'm not qualified to discuss, which is all the homosexual stuff. As a straight man, I feel like I don't have the right to talk about this, but I think personally it's handled really poorly here. It seems to be saying that the gayer you become, the closer you become to knowing your true animal self, and every leather-clad gay man in a 12-block radius is just one blowjob away from stabbing someone to death. I mean, that's the implication I got from the ending and with the murder of Ted. It felt like, to me, Al Pacino had accepted himself as being a gay man, and it just drove him crazy. And that's what I feel like the film is trying to say throughout, and it kind of feels wrong-headed. So for me, Cruising, it's an interesting time capsule. I mean, everything is kind of turn of the decade, 1980, taken to some very leatherific extremes. I also chuckled at the implication that the gay community were pretty much around every street corner, engaging in all sorts of depravity, even in like the park, like Central Park, like they were like spread out on like picnic blankets. And I don't know if I buy that or not. I mean, I wasn't there. If anyone who was there can, qualify that, write in. But it just seems so exaggerated and, like I said, kind of wrong-headed. Like I was saying, I think that, like you guys said, the Ted character was the most realistic of the lot. I mean, he's very likable and just kind of a normal guy stuck in this weird story, but, hey-oh. So, overall, Cruising, I think it's an interesting take on the cop thriller meets slasher film, and it is a slasher to me. I mean, it can be, more than a slasher. It can be a cop thriller. It can be a gay drama. It can also be a slasher, like Erik said. And, I enjoy it, but I don't know if it's one that warrants repeat viewings with me personally. I just feel like some of the story beats are kind of clumsy, like the Ted character dying, for example, just so they can kind of tease that Al Pacino might be a killer. I just think it feels sloppy and just kind of thrown in just for shock value. It has no real, like, personal oomph because you don't see Ted die. It's just, he's dead. So, there's that. And the scene with the opening scene with the cops kind of harassing Gene Davis, who was in The Fan, by the way, in drag. It just kind of goes nowhere. Those cops don't really get their comeuppance. They just kind of disappear. And they spend so much time on this opening scene. It's like, why? I just didn't really make much sense. So overall, I think as a thriller, as a mystery slasher, it's pretty decent. I like the idea of kind of switching from one killer to another. I just don't like the idea behind why they're doing it. So for me, it's kind of middle of the road, marginal thumbs up at best.
Okay, thank you. I think it was interesting. Also, Joe Spinell. There's a lot of slasher movie alumni in this. And Joe Spinell obviously was in Maniac and the Last horror movie, aka The Fanatic. He played one of those cops, and they were saying, wasn't it, the Gene Davis character was saying he may have been not a real cop, or actually the police chief saying sometimes there's people dressing up as cops, and of course you see that whole scene with loads of everyone. It's cop night, but it turns out that Joe Spinell really is a cop because he's there at the when the bodies of Don Scardino's character is discovered right at the end. So he really is a cop, but also he's in the leather. He's branding the leather bars as well. So. It's kind of, I don't know. The thing for me with this film is I don't know whether or not Friedkin is a genius or full of shit, if I'm honest. when it comes to this movie. I really don't know, and I have a feeling one way or the other. But it'll be interesting when we talk about some of the background. What happened and the controversy over it, and the kind of perhaps the mishandling of the way the project was done. So it's going to be interesting to see. But of course, the other film that reminded me of, and there was another film called Windows, which also came out in 1980 with Talia Shire, which was kind of the lesbian inverted commas version of Cruising, except it wasn't about gay clubs and stuff. It was about a sort of more of a stalker thing. And that was another very controversial movie which got picketed by gay groups at the time. Have any of you seen Windows?
Yes, I love Windows. I think it's very deliberately...
I prefer OS.
Oh, Erik, is that your joke of the week?
No, my joke of the week's even better.
Yeah, Windows is deliberately paced, but it's very atmospheric. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty good.
But again, that was a film that attracted controversy because of the idea that the killer's sexuality was a driving force for the kind of basic psychosis.
Well, Justin, let me ask you real quick. You compared this film to The New York Ripper. Did you think maybe this might have inspired something like City and Panic, the one where they're killing the AIDS victims, or the gay community with the AIDS victims, or something like that?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, very possibly. I mean, that was done in a much more tasteless way. I would kind of
yes, very tasteless.
But that was kind of very over the top. I mean, the other film that reminded me of was Looking for Mr. Goodbar, which was I can't remember the name of the woman now. What was her name? But she was. It was kind of like a inverted commas straight version of this, whereas this, a woman on a single scene, sort of in bars and stuff, and. Basically gets tangled up with a serial killer. Diane Franklin. I'll remember her name in a minute. But anyway, there was Keaton. That was it, Diane Keaton. And that was quite a depressing movie. I don't know have you guys ever seen that? Looking for Mr. Goodbar.
Yeah, once. I don't remember much about it, but I remember it being depressing.
Yeah. So there was definitely something in the water. Kind of at this time. I mean, the other thing that intrigued me about this partly was the fact, again, I don't know if there's the same commentary you listened to, Erik, but William Friedkin says that 40 minutes was cut for an R rating. Mm-hmm. And the majority, said all of it, was at the clubs of sexual scenes. And of course, most infamously, and this goes down into and I can't believe I'm going to say this, but the annals of horror is the fisting scene in this was apparently unsimulated. So it actually happened for real. And whether it was orchestrated by William Friedkin, I don't know. And apparently it caused some extras to walk out, even though they were kind of leather men, because they were worried about how their community was going to be perceived by Middle America watching the kind of scenes in this. So the mind boggles what 40 minutes, which apparently were lost, according to William Friedkin, and were destroyed by whoever put it out, United Artists, whoever put it out. So whether or not there is a 40-minute extra leather extravaganza of all sorts of shenanigans, which will one day see the light of day, I don't know.
Well, he said I was listening to the commentary track he did with Mark Kermode, the UK-based critic. And he was saying that the 40 minutes he knew they would never get through the MPAA, but he just threw them in there to give them something to cut so that they'd leave the bulk of the film intact. It's kind of like what I think was it. Trying to remember. Well, I think it might have been Stuart Gordon did this something similar, maybe Reanimator or From Beyond, where he threw extra gore in it, so that when he did the cuts, it would be the film he wanted, if you know what I mean.
It just doesn't quite sit right with me that a studio would destroy elements from a film by William Friedkin, who'd made The French Connection and The Exorcist, like two of the biggest movies of the early to mid 1970s. Do you know what I mean? It feels a bit odd.
I think it was par for the course then. I mean, there are certain deleted scenes from The Exorcist that were unearthed, but the audio track was missing.
Yeah, well, let's shall we move on to some background? I mean, Erik, you were mentioning you were talking about some of the audio issues with the movie.
Yeah, this was because word got around. The script sort of was leaked to the gay community in New York where they were filming, and they didn't like what they saw, so they tried to disrupt the filming process by blowing whistles and generally causing a ruckus during recording. So it meant that the dialogue tracks for a lot of the scenes were unusable. So they had to dub a lot of the voices, which gives it that sort of strange, dislocated feel. They also, for night scenes, they were trying to shine lights onto the set, using mirrors and reflectors and torches and stuff to try to disrupt filming. And you can still see some of that in the scene where Powers Booth is informing Al Pacino about what the hanky code is. If you look outside the shop in the background, you can see sort of lights flashing onto the street, and that was caused by the disgruntled people who were sort of against the filming of cruising.
I was wondering about that because there's a couple of scenes where it feels like it's got this blue hue to it, and then like it gets brighter, and they couldn't match it in color matching. So it feels like someone's doing something off screen. I was kind of wondering about that. So
could be that.
That's interesting.
One thing I found really interesting about the inspiration for the film is it's based on a real life murder case. It's based on a few different things, but one of them is this real life murder case involving a killer who actually was an extra in The Exorcist. His name is Paul Bateson, and he was working in the radiology department where Reagan goes in to get tests, and so they employed him as an extra, to operate the equipment and that. But he was convicted of killing 8 people, but he says he only ever remembers killing 1. Which is kind of what the character of Stuart says. And he says he only killed... Doesn't he say at one stage he only killed 1 person? Am I imagining that? Maybe I'm imagining
he says something like, confess to the rest and I'll make sure you get a lenient sentence.
This is it, yeah.
You'll get...
Yeah, because this is what they said to this guy, Paul Bateson.
He says, I never will. He says, I never will. Yeah.
And one of Friedkin's friends on the police force is a guy called Detective Randy Jurgensen. Randy Jurgensen. He has a role here as the lead detective, and he was the real inspiration for Pacino's character because he actually went undercover into the gay scene trying to catch a killer. And apparently the work made him question his own sexuality, which is, probably the dubious beginnings of what you were talking about, Joseph. Justin's already said about the misdirection involving having multiple people play the killer or stroke is it killers. So here's a little synopsis. So in the first murder, the motel scene murder, at the start the victim is played by Arnaldo Santana and the killer is Larry Atlas. The second murder in the park has Larry Atlas as the victim and Richard Cox as the killer, and the third murder has brings back Arnaldo Santana, who was killed in the motel scene at the start, as the killer. So he's the one who walks into the peep show booth, and then Richard Cox, who plays Stuart, plays him leaving the booth. So he's using lots of different people to play the killer. Now, I couldn't really gather if he was doing that to misdirect the audience. There is actually only one killer, but he was just making things a bit more subversive by having different people play him, or not, because it's the same person's voice is dubbed onto all of them. It's an actor called James Sartorius. So yeah, I'm not sure if that was because he brings back a murdered victim to play the killer later in the film. It makes me think he was just.
Yeah, because there's scenes in where the two different actors playing the killer, both of them will say, "You made me do this." So I'm thinking it's one person, but Friedkin was kind of being cute and casting multiple actors as the killer. I don't know.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I watched it. But then
it's
just
really
was
hard
saying
to decipher.
Yeah. But I guess it's good to have these question marks to think about and discuss afterwards. Now I didn't freeze frame the film to notice this. Maybe you did, Justin. But apparently there's subliminal shots of anal intercourse during the stabbing scene.
Well, I just thought, see, that for me, that again plays that kind of William Friedkin sort of rubbing his hands together in glee at being shocking. You think, so I've got away with it, kind of thing, which I find. Yeah, I just wonder if that. I'm trying to think of his other movies and whether or not that the kind of, if he had that, I think he probably did a bit with The Exorcist.
Certainly not with The Guardian.
But just as because if you remember back, I don't know when it started, but I certainly I remember like the clone thing. You remember like there used to be like a leather men, and then there'd be clones where people would dress identically to each other. Yeah. And whether or not that was around at that time, and that was something that Friedkin was using as part of this whole killer is the same person as different people because they're all clones of each other. I don't know if that was
interesting. Yeah.
I also got kind of a vibe where it'll show shots of the one person standing there in the club in the full gimp outfit. Their face is covered with a zip up mask. I kind of got the feeling that was the killer, and he was watching and picking people out from the crowds. And once he leaves the club, he's just kind of blending in, as it were.
Well, it's also the fact, like as I mentioned at the beginning, the whole reason Al Pacino's character comes in is because there's a killer going around dismembering gay men and throwing their body parts in the Hudson.
Yeah, and they don't even reference that ever again. It's like, oh, you solved the case. Welcome to the detective squad. And it's like, wait a minute. What about all these floating body parts? You haven't tied a single one of these to any of these suspects at all.
You were mentioning the 40 minutes missing from the film that have gone into folklore. James Franco made a film called Interior Leather Bar in 2013 that I haven't seen, but it's sort of a reimagining of the shooting of those legendary 40 minutes of missing footage from Cruising. This is the one that really gets me about this. Apparently, attached to Cruising early on, this would have been in the mid-70s, was a certain Steven Spielberg. This was pre-Jaws. He'd just done Sugarland Express and Jewel at this stage, but he was originally attached to direct Cruising. Now, it has to be said, it's based on a 1970 novel by Gerald Walker called Cruising, which apparently was more sedate than what Friedkin did. I think Friedkin sort of sensationalized it quite considerably but also maybe the gay scene wasn't as publicly sordid in 1970 as it was in 1979. I don't know. So Steven Spielberg, imagine his version of Cruising. I think it would be much more straightforward. I think there'd probably be one killer and probably no fisting.
It's like E.T. would touch them on their anus and be like, ouch.
Well, I've got these visions of the great white shark from Jaws being fisted or E.T.
Oh.
Okay, and I just let me look down here. We've mentioned all of these things. The one last thing I have to mention is that the corpse's position of the Don Scardino character is modelled on the cover of David Bowie's Lodger album, which was released in 1979. So if you've ever seen that album, it has a picture of David Bowie all squished against the ground. I think he has a plate of glass over him or something because his nose is all squished and everything.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so that was the inspiration for the pose of Don Scardino's character in the end, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you, Erik. Fascinating stuff. So, Nathan, how about you? Have you got anything for us?
Sorry, I should have had background, but I honestly totally forgot to even look it up. That's how awful it is. Don't fire me.
No, well, that's okay, because you can unearth lots of background for your upcoming Patreon pick.
Yes. Surely there's tons of material out there for that.
There's got to be. I'll find plenty.
Well, we'll look forward to that. So what about you, Joseph?
Not a lot. Just Cruising hit the video market in late 1980 via Lorimar and MGM CBS Home Video in this really gaudy silver box with a single image of Al Pacino in his leathers, looking like he's posing for a cover of Playgirl. It had a post theatrical screening at the U of A, or the University of Alberta, at the, and I swear I'm not making this up, at the Sub Theater, which is a campus screen in January of 1981. The lineup for that week was No Nukes, The Shining, Airplane, and then finally Cruising. It had two showings, a 7 o'clock and a 9:30, and admission for students was $2 and $3 for everyone else. And the advert said, "Warning: violent and sadistic content may be disturbing." And
what's No Nukes? I know the other three, obviously, but what wasn't anyone?
I've never heard of No Nukes. It had a picture. I sent you guys a picture.
Yeah,
to,
I saw that.
Facebook.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with No Nukes, but I just kind of find it very funny that one night you're watching Airplane and laughing, and then the next night you go see Cruising, and there's that fisting scene, or there's that big black cowboy. Yeah, that's all the background I have on it.
Okay, well, thank you. I've got a fair bit here. It's just say the film was cost various kind of estimations of $7 to $11 million to make. The script was rejected by 3 major studios until Al Pacino signed on. And say originally, William Friedkin wanted Richard Gere in the character, which I think would have been an interesting role, but for whatever reason that didn't happen. We mentioned about the real life murders that it was based on. What else have we got? When it came out, the film, as I say, it was given an X rating, and Friedkin claims he took it to the MPAA board 50 times at a cost of $50,000, and then of course the famous 40 minutes deleted footage was cut. Apparently, Friedkin and Pacino dressed up and went incognito to leather bars before filming, and hung out at them and did quite a lot of reconnaissance. But Al Pacino reportedly distanced himself from the film, or whatever ended up on screen. He said he had no idea when he filmed he signed on for the film it would be termed by some as anti-gay. He said that some press reports had kind of stirred things up by saying his character was going to go on a rampage and kill gay men in the film, which had obviously kind of stirred the pot quite a bit. He, funnily enough, he accused Friedkin of removing scenes in the script that he'd agreed to, which presumably, it doesn't quite gel with his 40 minutes of kind of sex scenes that Friedkin reportedly took out. And he said he took the meat out of them, which is a funny way of putting it. But afterwards, he was nervous about the protest because he'd been defiantly anti-political before. He apparently, when he saw the film, he hated it. And he and Friedkin were only talking through their lawyers. Although, again, I saw some press reports of him going to Australia on a press junket with Friedkin, so maybe they made up. He said in an biography I read of him about this time, he actually felt so bad about making Cruising that he actually put some of the money from the profits he made towards AIDS research and helping kind of AIDS causes in New York some years afterwards. The reason why I'm thinking it was all a bit confused was that apparently there was loads of confusion on set, and there were apparently daily script changes. And Richard Cox had said to Al Pacino, he said, "I was originally signed on to play the killer, but now I'm a victim." And so it sounds as if things were changed, and which possibly why there's this whole thing about, is it Emperor's New Clothes? Was Friedkin a genius, or was it just a bit of a mess that he cut together? And it just went, because I imagine making a film where he was harangued, he's literally under siege all the way through it, that it sounds like it may have been a bit of a nightmare to make. The gay activists had said they'd seen a copy of the script, but some said they hadn't, and it led to riots in Greenwich Village during filming. As you mentioned, there were bomb threats and rocks and missiles thrown at the cast and crew, and bars cancelled location contracts because the fury, because obviously they were worried about the patrons of their bars boycotting them as well. Friedkin apparently refused to talk to activists, saying he was too busy, which only could have made things worse. And one of the things that was said was, at the time, it said by gay activists, it said gay men are presented as one-dimensional, sex-crazed lunatics, vulnerable victims of violence and death. This is not a film about how we live. It's a film about why we should be killed. Now, I mentioned about Don Scardino. He lambasted the movie afterwards, and he's quoted, I found a quote of him saying, "I found the murder of my character more morally reprehensible than anything else. We're not taught to handle growing up gay in this society, so we engender violence against it. Cruising had the opportunity to say that, and it didn't." So there was a lot of controversy, obviously, at the time. And one of the things that sort of links back to it was that there was actually murders after the filming, and whether or not it's linked to the film. But in November of 1980, a minister's son took a machine gun and shot patrons in front of the Ramrod bar where much of the filming had taken place, killing two. And at the time, that was linked in the press to potential homophobia that was kind of stirred up through Cruising. The film was picketed on Broadway, protesters holding signs saying things like "Hey ho, ho ho, the moving Cruising's got to go," and "Pacino sucks," which would have, I'm sure, has some double meanings. But United Artists even told theatre owners they could deduct the cost of security from box office receipts. And apparently in some areas it purposely didn't announce which cinemas would be showing it to avoid people turning up to protest. It was booed off screen at a German film festival. It got kind of universally damning reviews. I've got a couple of bits coming up, but it opened wide to 500 cinemas and took 5 million at the box office in the first 5 days. Just to put it into context, at the time, many of the extras and the leather scenes were kind of real patrons of the bars, but at the time it was actually legal to fire someone for being gay in New York City. So just putting that into context. But the film, funnily enough, and I saw some examples of this, is some theatre advertising actually said we think this film should have been an X. So we're putting this. They put signs up outside the theatres and in alongside their advertising the film, and saying that we believe this should have been X-rated and told patrons not to bring kids along, because of course it was an R-rated movie. You could bring children to see it. At least one theatre chain broke contract and refused to play it and cancelled plans to show it in 35 theatres.
Mummy, where's that man's arm gone?
In pre-echoes of Friday the 13th, the MPAA was criticised for passing of an R rating. And apparently Richard Hefner, who was the chairman of the MPAA at the time, said, "No picture has given us so much anguish as Cruising. People are angry. They want to be saved from the film, but it's not the job of the ratings system to punish movies for moral or aesthetic reasons." And Rona Barrett, lastly, Rona Barrett on Good Morning America, of all places, said the film should have been X-rated. And she told anguished people over their breakfast, "It is filled with unmitigating violence that does nothing but degrade human beings." So the film, it was pretty controversial, to say, to put it bluntly. But just a couple of reviews, and say the film wasn't particularly well reviewed at the time, and I think it's going to be revisited by critics. But Newsday said Cruising is sensationalized slumming New York's most debauched homosexual fleshpots, combined with a manhunt for a mad slasher who preys on gay victims. The Philadelphia Inquirer called it graphic disgust and nothing else. Sex and violence, the twin mother loads of current commercial cinema, are present in quantity in William Friedkin's Cruising. The sex, much of it plays like a training film for proctologists, is enough to turn the strongest heterosexual stomach, and the violence has provoked cries of outrage amongst homosexuals. The New Yorker said, "If you hang around with gays and the leather set, the film implies you will end up dead or killing someone. A slovenly, bruising movie whose persistent uncertainties of tone and meaning only confirm the fears that it was made mostly to shock and sell." And lastly, I think the Daily News said, "A depraved and mindless piece of garbage that should never have been made. There must be filmmakers with responsibility and ethics and a moral conscience out there somewhere. William Friedkin is not one of them. These freaks with their pierced ears, hairy face in Nazi stormtrooper drag invented themselves. And if Cruising caused a gay backlash and they now deserve, then that's the beating that they deserve," which I think was, it just goes to show actually there's a lot of homophobia in the press as well at the time. So you had theatres pulling it probably because of homophobia. So it was, now sometimes we're trying to think, I can't think of another movie or movies out recently that went to kind of mainstream cinemas that would have caused this much consternation and kind of anger. Because the other film that I was looking at the movie press, and they said the other film that had just come out at the time, and there's the big controversial movie, was Caligula, which had caused huge amounts of and
anguish. Has fisting in it as well.
Well, yes. So you had this this is where the slasher movies coming out with your Halloweens and Friday the 13th, and they're kind of a bit more popcorny, and you've got films like Cruising and Caligula. And I mean, Caligula is a very silly film at its heart. That's a film I quite enjoy. It's very daft. But it's there was a lot, this was really kind of kickstarting that kind of the backlash that came in the summer of 1980 with Siskel and Ebert over Friday the 13th. It was the things were set in pace by these movies of the early 1980s. So all in all, I think it's a fascinating movie. I am not convinced that William Friedkin really understood what he was making, and I think he he went into it with wanting to shock and was not necessarily a responsible filmmaker, put it that way. But having said that, it's an interesting timepiece, isn't it?
One thing about another thing listening to the commentary is that there's no love lost between Friedkin and Pacino. Friedkin calls him the most unprepared actor he'd ever worked with. What he meant by that is that Pacino liked to be spontaneous, and so he wouldn't learn his lines. Friedkin mentions Marlon Brando used to stick his lines onto the back of other people's heads and the back of their coats and stuff, so that he'd just read them in the moment. He wouldn't have seen them before, and this was his sort of method style acting. So that he'd come across as more spontaneous. And he said Al Pacino was along the same lines, in that he'd come into work every day really unprepared. And he says about Al Pacino kind of refused to do any publicity for the film, and Friedkin says, well, that's a good thing, because the idiot can barely string a sentence together. So yeah, really no love lost between the two on that.
Interesting. Okay, well, that was Cruising. So Joseph, what was the kind of consensus on the group?
Well, from 68 comments, just one short of being real. Yeah, one short of being real immature about this. Our contrasting listeners of the week are Mike Babbitt, and he writes, one of my favorites. I've been waiting for you guys to cover this movie, not to hear your genuine insight on its depiction of gay culture, but simply to hear y'all discuss the big black cowboy. And I think we did. And Noel Salman, I don't know how to pronounce that. He writes, forget about the homophobia. It's an incoherent hot mess of an unthrilling thriller. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Listen on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and about 1 billion other podcatchers. If you enjoy the show and are willing and able to provide a monetary contribution, please consider cruising on over to Patreon. If you're not a Patreon member, we've got some top secret stuff brewing over there we hope to release soon. If you have something to say, drop us a line at the Hysteria Continues, all one word, at gmail.com.
Excellent. Yes, we've got some exciting stuff coming. As again, not a sexualized mention, but anyway, let's go on to what's coming next, don't you, Erik?
Yes.
It's my joke of the week. It's so bright and fantastic.
So, who is Al Pacino's character in this film? Who's his favorite policeman? Fisting. The police, sting, fisting, fisting. That's the Swanee whistle. That means it's good. Hello? Anyone there?
The abject silence is just golden.
Yes. It's like a golden shower.
Cool. My favorite joke of yours is always going to be Hatchet.
Oh, thank you. I was proud of that one.
Right. So do we have any other feedback this time?
Yeah. We forgot to do feedback on the Blood Sisters episode. So if you've written in and you haven't heard your feedback by now, we're sorry. We had a little kerfuffle, but we'll press ahead. So, Justin, you should have one I sent to you.
Yeah.
Always professional here at the Hysteria Continues.
Well, exactly. Let me just find that, because I'm sure it is here.
So disappointed in Justin. Oh, my God.
Here we go. I've got it. You can shove that, Erik. Yeah, you know where. Right, so I have a long one here. It says, hello, Justin, Erik, Joseph, and Nathan. Apologies for not writing in a while. Finally, I got around to listening to the Forest episode that kept pestering Nathan to pick. Though I'm a fan of the film, its supernatural elements, I agree that it probably could have been better as a straightforward slasher with a more creative villain, not some guy who looks like the town drunk. I also listened to your Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 episode. I am definitely on Nathan's team with this film, and it's been a favourite of mine for years. I remember my friend had this on VHS and we watched it at his 6th grade sleepover party, which was a big deal because my parents wouldn't let me watch R-rated movies. I thought Bill Moseley's Chop Top character was one of the best things about the film, and the radio station scene had some genuine scares. Loved the soundtrack too, with some great tracks by the Cramps, the Lords of the New Church. And lastly, good observations from Justin about how the film seemed to be a big influence on Rob Zombie. If I'm not mistaken, the scene where LG's face is cut off and put on stretch was later blatantly ripped off in The Devil's Rejects. Keep up the great work, Rob Balducci. And P.S. Erik, I loved your Toby or not to be joke.
Oh, thank you. Well, that fisting joke was especially for you.
Is it a bit like Kylie Minogue and what's his name?
Jason Donovan.
Especially for you. Yeah. So, thank you, Rob, and I, glad you caught up with the show. So yeah, and we'll hopefully find Nathan will find the one he was sent.
Yes, I will. I'll keep looking.
Okay, so this is why we don't get any feedback, isn't it? Because people think we are all unprofessional.
Yeah, I mean, in my defense, I have been working a lot of overtime lately.
No, well, that is fair enough, but. Okay, Erik, I think am I right in thinking it is you up next?
It is, yeah. Now, my initial instinct was to go for another film from 1980 that was kind of downbeat, but I said, no, I might save that for next time. So we're fast forward into 1986, and God, I don't even know if this is a slasher, but it is reviewed on Hysteria Lives. I'm going to go for Nico Mastorakis' film The Wind, which is also known as, I think, Edge of Terror. I think it's reviewed under that title on Hysteria Lives. So it came out on Blu-ray from Arrow last year or the year before. So I have it, and we'll give it another watch.
Okay, so, well, it'll be interesting to cover that one. I think it is a slasher movie. It's got Wings Hauser chasing, what's her name?
Meg Foster.
Meg Foster around a Greek village with a scythe. So, okay, and I thought as Al Pacino is slightly diminutive in his role, I was surprised actually how small Al Pacino is.
He's like 5'7" or something like that. He's not very tall.
He looks really diddy, doesn't he, in a lot of the scenes? Especially he's walking along Paul Sorvino. I think maybe he's a bit taller. But so I thought, not using any music from the film, but thought we'd play out with Sex Dwarf by Soft Cell.
I love that song.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so in honour of Al Pacino and cruising, Sex Dwarf.
Very good. Speaking of music, Justin, before we go, one last thing I learned from the commentary is that the music that Friedkin put into the club scenes is not what they were playing there. They were playing sort of cliched disco and what we hear in regular gay clubs, but he thought it needed toughening up a bit, so he put in sort of underground and punk type stuff instead.
Well, see, that was one of the things for going to gay clubs in the 80s and stuff. It was kind of like there'd be lots of very tough-looking men, but lots of Hazel D. Again, it was that kind of weird, that weird kind of, what's the word for it, juxtaposition between that kind of tough guy thing and playing very, very kind of frothy pop.
Yeah, I was at a wedding once, and the reception was just in their back garden, and they were playing Fleetwood Mac, I think it was, and this really big butch guy came up to me and went, "Oh, I can't stand that music. It's so dreary. Why can't you play some like Ezeldine or Bananarama?"
You sure you weren't standing in front of a mirror?
Sounds like you were in Jamaica. Your accent sounded Jamaican.
No, that was Northern England. No, I wasn't looking in a mirror.
Well, I think we've gone full length with cruising, haven't we? So, we'll catch you next time on a Greek island. So what a change of pace, but it should be a fun one. So anyway, let's shake those disco balls and say goodbye to the good people.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Shake